good morning. We are Rafa Mendoza and Sydney Ting, and we will be presenting on Chapter 7 of Fun Home by Alison Bechtel. The first page we will annotate is the chapter page. Chapter 7 is entitled The Anti-Hero's Journey, and it is to no surprise that this refers to Bruce's life. So you might be wondering what an anti-hero is and how this relates at all to Alison's father. So the definition of an anti-hero is a protagonist who lacks the conventional attributes of a traditional hero. While their actions are ultimately noble, they don't always act for the right reasons. An anti-hero is usually plagued with insecurities and lacks moral goodness. From this, we can now see that all the fictional characters that Allison uses in reference to Bruce are anti-heroes, such as Jay Gatsby from The Great Gatsby, Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, and Daedalus and/or Icarus from Greek mythology. This leaves us with the assumption that Bruce too is an anti-hero. Now I will discuss the anti-hero's journey. So the anti-hero's journey is very similar to the hero's journey, except there are a few changes. So I won't be discussing the entire cycle. I'll just focus more on the important and substantial steps of the journey. So the first step is the cruel world. So unlike heroes who begin their journey in an ordinary world, the anti-hero already faces hardships. In the life of Bruce, this could be seen through the realization of his sexual orientation, which we will learn more about in page 221. But basically, this first step refers to Bruce being gay in a time where homosexuality is frowned upon and is unaccepted in society. The next substantial step would be tests, allies, and enemies. In relation to Bruce's life, this can be seen when he becomes sexually active with other males. At this point, he is betraying Helen, his wife, by seeing other boys despite them being married. So the final part of this journey is atonement, which literally means reparation for a wrong or injury, which this entire chapter is about. So next we can discuss the chapter's title image. So in the image, we see Allison as a child leaping off a diving board, and her father is there to catch her when she falls. This image is really important in Bruce's anti-hero journey, specifically his atonement. I will discuss the image towards the end of the video so that the explanation can be clearer. So overall, the key takeaways from this chapter page is that Bruce was not the villain nor the hero in Allison's life, and that Allison views him as ultimately noble despite his shortcomings.
The next page we'll be discussing about is page 195. So just for some context, on this page, Allison talks about how even if her father had not died earlier due to the accident, he probably would have still died soon because of the recent outbreak of HIV and AIDS. She also claims that in that scenario, she could possibly have lost her mother too. So, for definition of terms, HIV and AIDS fall under the category of sexually transmitted diseases or STD, while HPA-23 is a drug developed to treat HIV. Allison claims that her father would have died as a result of his sexual activity since cases of HIV and AIDS are becoming more dominant. Not to mention, while Allison and her siblings slept at night, he would often leave the apartment, though Allison does not know why exactly. It can be seen here how Bruce remains secret about himself. In previous chapters, Allison also tries to make attempts to connect with her father, such as in chapter 1 when Allison tries to kiss Bruce but ends up just kissing his knuckles, though it is difficult when she can hardly relate with him. She states how death by HIV and AIDS would have been a much more painful and protracted way to die, which she would not have preferred. Allison's act of displacing her actual grief with an imaginary trauma of losing her parents to HIV and AIDS might suggest her weak connection with her father, which she tries to conceal with something actually dramatic. Newspapers usually contain big and wide images, often used for headlines and such, while the texts are placed aside. It can be noted that this page from the book also makes use of wide rectangular panels and images similar to that of a newspaper's. This whole page discusses about news, specifically about the fear of the HIV and AIDS outbreak, with each panel containing a newspaper in it. With this, perhaps Allison is trying to make the readers be in her shoes when she was reading the newspapers by making this page resemble one. So, based on these, the key takeaway from this page is that the HIV and AIDS outbreak presents Bruce's fragility, and more especially as a result of his obscurity, which had made it difficult for people like Allison to connect and understand him, especially while he was still alive. The next page is page 221, which we'll be discussing about and annotating. So, for more context, on this page, Allison and her father Bruce are in a car on the way to the theater. Bruce talks about his experience with his sexuality when he was young, though speaks ambiguously. At this moment, Allison is able to relate with her father regarding wearing the clothes of the opposite gender, though despite this, their conversation still has a lot of dead air in it. This can be seen in the use of several panels to depict the passing of time during their conversation. Allison's ever changing facial expressions between panels also suggest restlessness in the car. We can also notice that their faces express awkwardness and boredom. This page also makes use of references from other works of literature, such as from the book Odyssey, where in this page they make use of the names Odysseus and Telemachus. Odysseus is Telemachus' father and the husband of Penelope. This page also uses references from the Ulysses by stating it was more like fatherless Stephen and sonless Bloom. In the book Ulysses, Bloom becomes Stephen's father figure, and Stephen becomes Bloom's son figure. But through the comparison of Odysseus and Telemachus, and fatherless Stephen and sonless Bloom, Alson shows how their interaction did not seem intimate despite being related to one another biologically. She also questions who is the father between them. It seems that the roles are inverted. In this scene, Allison is the listener while Bruce is the one talking, like how a child talks to their parents and their parents patiently listen. In the myth, it was Icarus the child who died and Daedalus the father who lived. However, in Fun Home, it is Bruce the father who died and Allison the child who lived. This also suggests the concept of inverts from the previous chapters too. Based on these, the key takeaway of this page is that, as seen in the previous chapters, Allison and her father do not have a close relationship with one another. However, on this page, they begin to express themselves a bit more and relate with one another. Earlier in the chapter, Bruce sends Allison letters when she's in college regarding her coming out, where Bruce secretly assumes that Allison knows his secret and speaks in a very cryptic and ambiguous manner. The emotional setting of their conversation in this page, where they're in a car, greatly reflects their relationship with one another. It may not be strong, but Allison is finally able to relate with her father in some way, though in a complex manner that does not follow the usual father and child relationship despite being father and child. Some additional notes on this page are that this page makes use of the concept of word specifics, where the words contain the message but not the images. The images are not actually the necessary. Some additional notes from this page are the concept of word specifics, where the words contain the message but not the images. The images are not actually necessarily since they are almost the same thing, which is Allison and Bruce in the car. And as stated earlier, in the images, only the dialogues and facial expressions are changing. Now, invert is, according to the dictionary, defined as to put upside down or in the opposite position, order, or arrangement, and can also mean a homosexual. Now, the concept of inverts shows the switching of roles since, specifically on this page, it shows, as said a while ago in the previous slide, that father and child, which is Bruce and Allison, seem to have switched roles as compared to the other literary references, such as from the Odyssey and Ulysses, where there is Odysseus and Telemachus, and Bloom and Stephen. And it seems that their conversation wasn't really what you'd think as a normal father and child conversation, since, as said a while ago, it's like the parent is the one talking to the child instead of the opposite. Usually, whoever was wiser was the one who would listen, but currently it seems as if they have a even level of wisdom. This is also a concept that is dominant in previous chapters.
Page 232 is the final page of the book, and again in this page, we see the image of Bruce catching a younger version of Allison. If you've read the book, you might realize that the last page looks similar to the beginning of the book, where Allison is balancing her body on her father's stomach. And on that same page, Allison says, in our particular reenactment of the mythic relationship, it was not me, but my father who was the plummet from the sky. Now, in the final page of the book, she restates that her father indeed hurtled into the sea, with a picture of the bus that her father was hit by. These lines in relation to Greek mythology show the fulfillment of a prophecy and bring us back to Allison's most repeated fictional story, the story of Daedalus and Icarus. At this point, we truly understand that Bruce could be represented by both Daedalus and Icarus based off of what happened in page 221. She then says that, but in the tricky reverse narration that impels our entwined stories, he was there to catch me when I leapt. In this statement, we can again see the inversion that Allison introduced to her readers in chapter 3. Inversion is basically the exchange of roles between her and her father. Throughout this entire chapter, we feel that Bruce is more of the child while Allison acts as the adult, especially in the scene where the two drive to the cinema to watch a movie. But in this final page, Bruce is assuming the role of the adult by catching Allison when she falls. We can now go back to the idea of the anti-hero journey, and how this is Bruce's final step. This is his atonement. Bruce attempting to catch Allison when she leaps represents how Bruce was truly there for Allison, even though she did not realize it at the time. So the key takeaway is that Bruce was not an absolutely terrible father. He was actually there for Allison for the better part of her childhood, and although Bruce did not treat his family too well, he was always there to catch Allison when she left.
These are the four key takeaways that were brought up from the pages that were analyzed in this chapter, which were the title page, page 195, page 221, and page 232. The thesis statement for chapter 7 that we came up with is that through the AIDS outbreak, emotional setting of their conversation, and Allison's realization of Bruce's active status in Allison's life, Allison was able to present the strengthening father child connection she has with her own father, despite the secrecy, ambiguity, and flaws. So that wraps this chapter. Thank you for watching.